Welcome to DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630, the sports capital, where we shine a light on local stories from the district, Maryland, and Virginia to inform, entertain, and inspire you. And my guest this morning on DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630 is Anna Nelson. She is the Vice President of Programs and Services with the Alzheimer's Association, the National Capital Area Chapter. And I want to thank Anna for joining me today on DMV Spotlight. I'm Barbara Britt. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be on your program.
So, Anna, most of us have been touched by Alzheimer's in some way. Maybe we have an aging parent or a relative, a friend, a coworker. Maybe it's us. Maybe we wonder if it's us. And I just want to sort of start at the beginning. Tell us, people have probably heard what Alzheimer's is, but give us a clear understanding of what Alzheimer's is.
Thank you for asking that question. You know, one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, what is the difference between the terms Alzheimer's and dementia? And what adds to the confusion is that the terms are usually used interchangeably, but they mean different things. Dementia really refers to a collection of symptoms of a number of diseases. So a number of diseases cause all these symptoms. The number one disease that causes these symptoms is Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's accounts for somewhere between 60 and 80% of all the dementias. So dementia means that a person's cognition has declined to a point that it interferes with their activities of daily living, such as their ability to dress themselves, bathe themselves, take care of their own finances. Dementia can also include behavioral and psychological symptoms such as agitation, aggression, sleep disturbances. We normally think of cognition as memory, but it also includes trouble with thinking, judgment, orientation to time, place, and person. But Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. There are also other forms of dementia, which adds to the confusion.
And I was going to say, even as you're describing that list, some of that is what I may be using this term completely incorrectly, which is why I'm glad you're here. Some of that we just call normal aging. And I don't know if that still is the case, but, you know, having some of it is just physically difficult to put your shoes on or button your shirt, or is there a distinction that we're talking about here? Or is that not? Is there no such thing as normal aging?
Well, you know, as we get older, you know, there are changes that happen in our brain, right? As we get older. So we notice that with our memory, right? You know, we notice that with our speech processing. Sometimes we'll say, you know, it's at the tip of my tongue. I can't come up with a word.
My good friend, and I can't remember her name, right, even though I adore her.
Right. But then you remember, right?
Yes, it comes to you.
Typically, one of the first symptoms that we observe is problems with short-term memory. So folks will say, you know, mom is repeating herself. We just had a conversation for half an hour and they're asking the same questions over and over again. I'll have folks say to me, you know, I walked into a room and I forgot what I was supposed to do. Is that dementia? Is that Alzheimer's? And I'll say, what did you do? And they said, well, I left the room and I came back and I retraced my steps. That's typical. That's an example of typical aging. Someone with Alzheimer's would not know how to retrace their steps. I also get folks that will say, you know, I left something in the microwave and I totally forgot because the phone rang. And the next day I go and open that microwave to put something in there and I see my dinner from the night before. Is that Alzheimer's? Well, the fact that you remember that was your dinner, that you took care of that's typical aging. That happens to us as we get older. It kind of defines aging, doesn't it?
It does. And that's a relief, because I was going to ask you about the losing of the keys, because that happens all the time. And I always get teased about that by my kids. You've lost your keys again. So there are the generic that the brain changes as we get older, the quote normal portions of it. The things that are there certain hallmarks of Alzheimer's? You mentioned that you will have a conversation with someone or they will repeat themselves. And then you get to that question. I didn't even give you a chance to answer that one. Mm-hmm. Is that then a dementia or is that Alzheimer's, and how do they know that?
Right. So dementia refers to all of these symptoms.
Okay.
You know, the disorientation, problems with judgment, problems with thinking. inability to retrace their steps. These are all the symptoms. And there's many conditions that can cause those symptoms. So that's the other reason why we tell families, if you're worried about your memory, go and see your doctor. I just talked to someone the other day, and I said, they were worried about their memory. And I said, maybe it's time to go and get a complete physical. When was the last time you did that? And they said, oh, like many years ago. And I said, no, you have to go there on a yearly basis. When your birthday comes up, make sure that you go and see your doctor, because there's also something to add to all of this to keep in mind, is that there's conditions that present themselves as dementia that are not. So, for example, someone with severe depression can show the symptoms of dementia. Someone with that is sleep deprived, for example. Has that ever happened to you when you
Guilty.
get very little sleep?
Very
right?
guilty.
And the next day you have a hard time finding the right words and forgetting what you're supposed to do. So side effects of medications, someone that has a vitamin B12 deficiency, for example, or someone that has an endocrine problem that's not managing that. That's why we tell folks, when you're worried, make a doctor's appointment. At the doctor's appointment, they'll conduct a battery of tests. They might order some blood work. They might order a CAT scan. They might order an MRI. An MRI, for example, would rule out other conditions. It will show them if there is a history of strokes, for example. A CAT scan might be indicative of, what are we seeing in the brain? What's happening there? Is this an indication that we're seeing deterioration in certain parts of the brain? So it's not an easy diagnosis. This is why I always tell families, if you're worried about your memory, make a doctor's appointment, but bring someone else with you, a family caregiver. And ask family, I've been getting absent-minded. Have you noticed that? And then play detective. What happened before the incident and what happened after? Because oftentimes we find caregivers that are running themselves 24/7, taking care of their loved ones, and now they're getting forgetful and they're worried about their memory, but it's because of the stress. So we're very careful. Doctors are very careful in diagnosing someone. A lot of times they'll have an initial meeting with the person, jot down the concerns, and then ask them to come back like 6 months later and then retest and then compare that and see if there is a pattern there.
Is there a fear, Anna, from even going to the doctor? Are there people say, I don't want to know. For me, it's just normal. Or is there a denial? Or is there that element for people, especially as people get older and they feel like they're losing control of other areas of their life, and so they don't necessarily want to uncover that about themselves? Is that an element?
Yes, especially if someone has a connection to the disease. So sometimes folks will come to our talks and will say, my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What are my chances of getting the disease? And the first thing that I'll say to them is, I want to know who diagnosed your grandmother, who diagnosed your mother, because it hasn't been until recent years that the medical community has been able to distinguish between the different forms of dementia. And there's many different kinds as well, so we need to keep that in mind. We don't always jump right in and make that diagnosis. They're very thoughtful in that process. But having said that, it's also important to know that the medical community needs the support. So one of the services that we offer, for example, is called Physicians Outreach, where we build relationships with the healthcare provider community, because they need to know what to look for. They need to ask. If you're of a certain age, when you turn 50 and you go, they do a battery of tests, right? They check to make sure that you don't have high blood pressure or cholesterol. With all the research that's going on, one of these days, I'll be able to go and they'll say, okay, let's test for your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and now we're going to do this blood test for Alzheimer's, right? We're not there yet, but research is progressing.
And I remember, I am old enough to remember when there was no test for Alzheimer's, where it was done after the person had passed away. That was the only way that they could know for sure that it was Alzheimer's. You could see elements of, as you said, the dementia, and Alzheimer's is part of that, but there wasn't any real test. Has that progressed now?
So in the research setting, we have new technologies, new imaging tools. We have an amyloid PET imaging and a tau PET imaging that will show in the living person whether they have the buildup of the plaques and tangles that are the hallmarks of the disease. Having said that, that just tells you if you have the buildup of the plaques and tangles in the part of the brain that tends to be associated with Alzheimer's. But the other part that we're just learning is that we need to understand more about the aging brain, because there are changes that happen as we get older, right? And so we need to be able to distinguish what changes are coming, what are the contributions from dementia, and what are the contributions from normal aging.
And I'm speaking this morning on DMV Spotlight on ESPN 630 with Anna Nelson. She is the Vice President of Programs and Services with the Alzheimer's Association National Capital Area Chapter. Very, very knowledgeable. And this is a good question, a good point that you bring up, Anna, because even the expectation in aging is different. People do take, for large measure, better care of themselves, generally speaking. There was a day when you turned a certain age and that was it. You were expected to sit on your rocker on the front porch. That doesn't happen. I mean, maybe some days it sounds good, but it's not happening for a lot of us. People are, we have role models now who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s and on, who are strong and healthy and taking care of themselves, and they're making some lifestyle choices. Is that also part of the research?
And actually, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I just came back from the Alzheimer's Association's International Conference, which took place in Los Angeles this July. And there's a lot of focus on lifestyle interventions in the prevention of cognitive decline in dementia. So there are a lot of studies that showed that by adopting multiple healthy lifestyle choices like healthy diet, physical activity, staying socially engaged, finding ways to stimulate your brain, moderate drinking, and just making sure that you're taking good care of yourself. A lot of these studies are showing that that might reduce your risk for cognitive decline in dementia. And plus, you need to add to that management of heart and vascular conditions. So the Alzheimer's Association is running this wonderful study called the U.S. Pointer Study that is looking to see whether the intervention of lifestyles that are focusing on all these multiple factors, plus the management of heart and vascular health and the role that that plays, because you and I can do something about our vascular health right now, right? If you have high blood pressure, for example, and you manage that, you avoid that next stroke. If you have high cholesterol and you manage that, you avoid that next heart attack. If you avoid these cardiovascular disease, then you're lowering your risk for all kinds of complications as well, and might lower your risk for cognitive decline down the road.
And I'm glad that you mentioned those lifestyle things that you can do, because those overlap, as you were saying, with so many other things. Almost every other study that we read about being healthy at any age includes those things of eating healthy. We know what eating healthy is. We know what it means. We know. We decide every day when we go to the fridge, or better yet, at the grocery store. And we know that we need to take care of ourselves and move our bodies and exercise. And we know that we need to keep engaged, really engaged, not just the superficial engaged. And keep that mind, your Sudoku, your crossword puzzles, your games, you're learning new things, making new neural pathways in the brain.
Absolutely. And actually what you're doing right now is you're like in the best job, I have to tell you, because you're constantly finding ways as a reporter. You're constantly reading. And then you're sharing that knowledge base with everyone that you meet, right? So your brain is really going full force. And you have an active life. All of that helps. And a lot of folks don't realize that's what we control, right? Mm-hmm. The number one risk factor for Alzheimer's is advanced age. We start aging the moment we're born, right? The second thing to keep in mind is genetics. We're talking about a neurodegenerative disease, so that we know genetics plays a role. However, there's these other lifestyle and environmental factors. That's what we can control. And that's tremendous. So I always tell folks, start small. People always ask me, what about the Mediterranean diet, the keto diet? And every time you turn around, there's a new diet. And I'll say, try to eat as close to nature as you can. Make things from scratch.
Amen.
Yes.
It's so, so true. And that's true, again, across the board. Are there now, Anna, medications that the Alzheimer's Association recommends, or just tell us about that progression of medications either that hurt or that help with Alzheimer's. Because again, back when we were even first talking about Alzheimer's decades ago, I can remember a world where nobody even knew the word.
Right.
Right. At least I can remember so far, sorry.
Yeah.
Are there medications that can help slow the progression?
That's a good question. We have medications that can help with the symptoms for a period of time. It helps some individuals. It doesn't help everyone. And then when these medications were developed, they were meant to help with the symptoms. They were never meant to stop the progression of the disease. And all the research that is going on right now in this area is to find better, effective treatments to slow or stop the progression of the disease. So for folks that are interested in learning more about all of that great research that's taking place, I invite your listeners to go to alz.org/research. And in regards to the conference, if they just search for Alzheimer's Association's International Conference 2019, they'll see all the areas that are being explored. For example, there's 16 companies that are looking to develop the Alzheimer's blood test. That's exciting, isn't it? All of this work is tremendous.
That would be amazing if we could get to the point where there is a blood test. But in the meantime, as you mentioned, the lifestyle factors, the risk factors, just the fact that we're over a certain age increases our risk. That age is 65. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So are there other, and you mentioned the genetics, for people who may or may not know about previous family history, or just say, we just knew that grandma kind of wasn't with it anymore, or whatever the terms were that people used to use. Is there a way to go back and find that out genetically, or not necessarily?
Well, the one thing to keep in mind is that your risk, we might come from the same family, and maybe we have a history of cancer in our families, but maybe there's something that I did different that is going to take me on that path to Alzheimer's. And for you, it doesn't. So I always tell folks, the best thing that you can do now is to be proactive about your health, to take care of your health, and to find ways to really stay engaged in life. Folks will say to me, I hear of all these exercises and games that I can do online. What do you think? And I said, well, if you want to be good at math and you want to take that class, go for that. But nothing beats being around in the real world, volunteering in the community, joining a club of some type, being around people, because when you're around people, I don't know about you, but when I'm around friends, I want to say something funny. I want to keep them engaged and keep them going. And that taps into different parts of your brain. It really strengthens those neural connections. Music is tremendous as well. So make sure that you just enjoy life and that you're active in life. Try to reduce your stress level. Make sure that you get enough sleep. A lot of times people will say, I can do fine with 5 hours. And I'll say, your brain needs 8 hours at least.
It needs
8 hours
the
of
rest.
sleep. Yes.
I'm speaking this morning on DMV Spotlight with Anna Nelson. She's the Vice President of Programs and Services with the Alzheimer's Association National Capital Area Chapter. And I want to ask you, I know that you mentioned volunteering. Obviously, like a lot of these organizations that serve us in the DC metro area, I'm sure that you count on volunteers. Tell us about some of the things that volunteers do.
Well, we have volunteers that are advocates for the cause. I mentioned earlier, the way we're going to find an effective treatment is by investing more on research. And our Alzheimer's advocates have been busy at work. Since 2011, the funding at NIH has quadrupled, and that's thanks to the thousands of volunteers that are meeting with our elected officials, urging them and letting them know we need to find a cure for this disease. We know that when we have invested largely on other diseases, we have found better treatments like for cancer and HIV/AIDS. We will now do the same thing for Alzheimer's. We have to, but we need more advocates to help us with that. We're also looking for volunteers to participate in clinical trials because, again, that's the other challenge, right? A lot of folks will say, I don't know, I don't want to take part in a clinical trial, I don't want to take medications. And I'll say, well, we're also looking for healthy individuals. There's some of the trials, actually, that it's all done online because we're studying family caregivers and the effect that it takes on them. So there's a lot of opportunities to participate in clinical trials, and we have a service called Trial Match. And so if folks just Google Alzheimer's Association Trial Match and you sign up for that, you'll get a listing of by way of email of all the interesting studies that are taking place in your backyard, and then you get to choose. That's a lifestyle study. I'm going to take part in that. Right?
And you know what? What a great empowering thing to do if you've just had a relative or someone that you love or a caregiver who's been diagnosed and you're feeling helpless, you're feeling anxious, maybe even angry, and you want to do something. This would be an amazing way to participate and help your relative perhaps, but certainly people in the future. Another way to help, you have the Walk to End Alzheimer's coming up.
Yes.
Mid-October, October 12th, right here on the National Mall. If you've ever been to an event on the mall, it's just so much fun because you're there in the beauty of our city with all the beautiful monuments and you're just surrounded. But tell us about the day itself and the purpose.
The day itself is really an inspirational experience for me. When I have been going to the walk in Washington, D.C. since we moved to the area for 5 years, and every year is a tremendous experience where you're surrounded by families that have a connection to the disease. Typically we have an attendance of about 3,000, and people are coming in. They want to share their personal story with you. They want to tell you why they're raising funds for Alzheimer's and related dementias. So we also offer support for folks that have other forms of dementia, by the way. And
so not just Alzheimer's. So
right.
If you have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia, people can call you,
help.
Go to your website and get connected. And even if they're not in this area, they can still look on your website and find a chapter?
Exactly. That 1-800-272-3900 connects folks with the local chapter. So if you're in New York and you call that 800 number, it will connect you to your local chapter. If I'm here, it will connect me to the chapter here.
Give me that number one more time, Anna.
Sure. That is 1-800-272-3900.
3900 1-800-272-3900. So the walk actually is on the mall at 12. It starts at 12th and Madison, but it's all down there in that area. Once you get down there, 3,000 people, you'll see them. And registration is at 8 a.m. morning of, so you can just go down and register, and then the ceremony at 9:30, and the walk begins at 10. What happens at the ceremony?
Well, I have to tell you, to me, the most inspirational piece is the ceremony of the Promise Garden ceremony, where folks will raise a flag in memory of the loved one that they're walking for. So purple flower, for example, means that they have lost a loved one to the disease. If they're carrying a yellow flower, that means that they're caring for someone with the disease. An orange flower means that they don't have a connection, but they support the mission. And a blue flower means that they're living with the disease. And to see a sea that, of people at the mall wearing purple and raising their flowers, it's truly inspirational because families want to make sure that they change the course of this disease for the next generation. And the only way to do that is with research. And what a better place than in the heart of our country, in Washington, D.C., where we can send a clear message to our legislators. We got to increase funding for Alzheimer's research.
And we have NIH right here.
Absolutely.
The best in the world.
They're friends of the association. We collaborate with them on a number of projects.
And so for these different flowers and these different, do they get the flowers when they get down there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then how long is the walk?
They can take, there's actually a couple of routes. They can go on the 1 mile route or the 3 mile route, their choice. And it is, I have to tell you, nothing keeps families away from the walks. I have seen families bring their children on strollers and they're covering them with plastic if it's raining outside. It's just a very, very emotional experience.
And you need volunteers to help there as well.
Yes, yes. And the best way to get in touch with us, again, is that by calling that 1-800-272-3900, and just to let us know that they would love to volunteer the day of the walk, and we're happy to take more volunteers.
That is wonderful. I want to circle back because you've mentioned caregivers a couple of times. Tell us about the unique challenge. It's never easy to care for someone that you love when they're getting older. It causes you to grow in different ways and maybe ways you don't want to. But tell us about the unique challenge that caregivers have when they are taking care of someone who has any type of dementia, including Alzheimer's.
The major challenge is that someone with Alzheimer's needs 24/7 care. And a lot of times family caregivers don't realize that they're doing all of this caregiving, right? Initially, we're talking about a disease that is very slow in its progression. So initially, families are stepping in and helping a little bit, right? But before they know it, they're providing all the care. And then they're not realizing why they can't get enough sleep, why they can't get anything done. And it's because they're there 24/7. If you are with a loved one at a community event, for example, and you turn around, that one split second could be that moment that your loved one might decide, I'm tired of this, I'm heading back home. And so they need a lot of attention, and families need to know that it's okay to ask for help. A friend of mine, he was former county executive in Prince George's County. He said to me once, asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And I think that, I thought that is very true. It's okay to ask for help because you can't do it alone. We often find that it's family caregivers that end up in the hospital because they're doing all this caregiving. So we urge them. We have support groups for them. We tell them we're just a phone call away. Whenever you're ready, we're open 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We're ready to talk to families whenever they're ready.
And is there care available for people with Alzheimer's? Has that progressed to the point where there are places where people can know that their loved one is getting good care?
Right. There's different types of programs for folks that are progressing with the disease. For folks who are in the early stages, some of them are still driving. They're just in the very early stage. But their families are looking for them to engage in some social programs. So the Alzheimer's Association has a program called Memory Cafes. These are social gatherings for the person with Alzheimer's and their caregivers, and we just brought in music and art therapy. That's for folks in the early stages. For folks in the middle stages and later stages, there's day programs in the community that offer a therapeutic environment. And then as they progress, there's other options as well. And that's something that we can share with families when we have care consultations with them. And by the way, the care consultations are available at no cost. And we typically meet with the individual that has been diagnosed if they were in the early stages and their families. And we help them put a plan of action for their care, right? And then that's when we talk about the different types of supports that are available both for the person and for their caregiver.
What do you want to say to the person who maybe was just diagnosed?
I want them to know that they're not alone, that we're just a phone call away. You mentioned earlier, most of us have a connection, and I can tell you, most of us that work at the association have a connection. And we also know that the person is ready to talk to others about the disease when they're ready. And I just want them to know, and I want their caregivers to know that we're there.
And that you respect those boundaries that they have when they're ready to come. But I want to make sure that people have the information that they need. It's www.alz for Alzheimer's.org, www.alz.org, and the phone number that you mentioned earlier, the 800 number. Anna, can you share that again? 1-800-272-3900, 1-800-272-3900. What happens when they call that number?
When they call that number, they get a professional who has experience in this field, and they are happy to talk to families and talk to them about local resources and supports for them.
And that is available right here in the DMV in the entire Washington area. I want to thank my guests this morning. I've been speaking with Anna Nelson. She is the Vice President of Programs and Services at the Alzheimer's Association National Capital Area Chapter. And of course, don't forget, on October 12th, it is the Walk to End Alzheimer's right at the National Mall. And thank you again for joining me this morning on DMV Spotlight.
Thank you.
On ESPN 630, I'm Barbara Britt.